Today I'm going to walk you through a little behind the scenes of a recent shoot for Crestline. Troyden, the owner of Crestline, reached out to get some pictures done for a new frame treatment that he's doing, and it was an interesting shoot. The weight of an eMTB is considerable, a full power one. He's got a smaller battery in this to save a bit, but it was still the limit of the stands that I'm using to have the bike on. It also entailed finding new ways to hang an object, because in the past I've used different grades of fishing line and I wasn't confident that that method was going to work to hang this bike frame. I think it's probably around 12 to 15 kg, which doesn't sound like a lot. However, when you're suspending that from a couple of flimsy backdrop stands, it can push the system a little bit. So as we can see, the setup was the frame on the backdrop. Frame left of the shot is a fill that I use to get some light on that side of the frame. The frame currently is sitting on a couple of weights just to prop it and hold it correctly on the floor. Right of frame, you can see the stand. It's a pretty flimsy backdrop stand that I had it on, and you can see a piece of paracord there that was hanging. Frame right is a 12 by 42 inch softbox, 48 inch softbox, and above the frame I had a 42 inch beauty dish. The other light there is my little video light. And there's my camera, and a little my little supervisor on the floor there as well. I'd already taken down the some of the props when I realized, I need to shoot the props, so I'm still getting used to this process of showing stuff behind the scenes. It's very much a set up, shoot, pull down, done kind of thing. Right here I have the paracord. It's a black one so that it's a bit easier to pull out where I need. This is a 3mm thick paracord. From the research I was doing, this was going to be fine if that gets focus. There it is. I've not shot with something like this before. I usually use fishing line to suspend things. However, I usually suspend things that are much lighter than this frame. I believe this weighed in above 12 kilo with the motor and a smaller battery in it. So I needed something more than fishing line. At the head tube, I used this setup of paracord, and I'm just unwinding it from a piece of acrylic that I stuck down through the head tube and underneath. And then the cord would pull, and I'd tie a noose around the top of the stand and suspend it that way. The noose is new to me. I'm terrible with knots. I wasn't a Boy Scout. I tend to just wrap fishing line around itself and keep tying knots until it doesn't move anymore. Learning to use noose type knots, there's probably a different name for them, was definitely a good thing for this shoot. The noose works really well as it just tightens once the weight is on there, and you can just pull it off and be done with it. So I plan to use that again in the future, and I'll try it with the fishing line and see how it goes. it may be a bit more tricky to tie into some fishing line. Looking at the images, you can see, I'll show on screen here as well, the some of the shots before retouching, so you can see the backdrop, or at least the ties suspending the frame in the shot, in the photo. The key thing to get in these photos was the forged carbon layup through the gloss finish over the top. It's a different layup than is typically seen on mountain bikes. There are some helmets that it's been seen in. Troyden, the owner of Crestline, doesn't believe he's seen it anywhere on a frame before. And it's an interesting finish that gives a unique look to a frame. It's aggressive, but also intriguing, I guess, or interesting. And the gloss still makes it a very high-end feeling finish. Something that I take a lot of time on with my setup for a frame, or often wherever there's a bottom bracket or a pivot involved, I'll try and set the frame so that the camera lens is looking straight through the bottom bracket, or a pivot if a pivot is the sort of part of the shot and there's no other pivots that'll come into play. It all depends on the situation, but typically I'll try and get the bottom bracket spindle to square up to the lens so that you have a nice clean look straight through. I think it just adds a real nice touch when you don't have bits and pieces moving around in the area that you're looking at. When planning this shoot, I intended to hang the bike from the rear axle with the paracord wrapped around the axle, and at the time I was still figuring out how I was going to get the head tube suspended, but I knew I was going to go through that head tube to level things out. The trick to this shoot was that Troyden handed me the frame with the axle, but no drive side fixture for the axle to mount into. As some of you may know, a lot of frames these days are coming with the SRAM direct mount derailleur setup, and that means there's no fixture for the axle to fit in unless the derailleur is on the bike. And when we were shooting the frame, we didn't want to include a derailleur. It takes away from the part that Crestline is providing the customer with, which is this frame itself. So when the frame was given to me and I was made aware of that, I had to work out how I was going to hang the rear end without it becoming a problem for shooting and retouching. The paracord I didn't want to wrap around the frame itself. It creates an imbalance in the rear center if the seat stay on one side or the other is strapped up. The seat tube, you could wrap it around the collar or something, then you've got to try and Photoshop that out, which is entirely possible, but ideally I wanted to steer clear of that kind of extra piece that isn't necessary. The Crestline has two rotating links that the suspension moves on, and the lower portion had a little bit of space between the other frame members where I was able to slide the paracord down through there and strap it in. And it actually worked out really well. Overall, the frame was in great condition. There's always cleaning needed, and I cleaned and buffed it as good as I could with a microfiber towel before hanging it. And then with gloves on, I did the hanging so that I could keep my fingerprints off the frame. Grease of the fingers would just show up anywhere on this gloss finish. And then I had to give it a little bit of a buff once it was hanging again. Despite all of this, as is always the case, dirt shows up, prints show up, what looked like residue from greases was showing up in spots, and that all needed to be retouched. One element that was an interesting retouch was the Crestline Speed Shop graphic down underneath the shock by the bottom bracket or by the motor. Something must have connected with a piece of the frame there, and a couple of the letters or a letter was missing the bottom of it. So I had to clean that up and make it look as good as it possibly could. Aside from that, the graphics were great everywhere else. It was more just dirt and grease and things like that that always come up when shooting products that needed to be cleaned up and removed. One shot that was a bit more interesting as far as setup goes was the latch door for the charging of the motor and the battery. This wasn't a shot that was requested, but I thought it was important to include, and I think we just missed it in our planning for the shoot. The door on the charging port is spring loaded, and I had to work out how to keep that open and get a good photo. So I set the camera up on my tripod, got the lights and the frame and everything set up where it was going to show up how I wanted it to. And then I used the props that I used for grips, these little pieces of wire, and I hooked the wire carefully on a piece of the door. And then I don't actually remember what I did on the other side, but the wire came down behind the frame below the BB, and I think I attached the other end into the axle for the motor so that it was holding the door open. It worked out really well. I think it's a good shot to have to show people how the charging port looks and where it's located and all those things. When you're buying an e-bike, I think you need to know little details like that. So I'm glad that I added that one in. It was pretty easy to remove the prop in post. The way that I set it up was intentional so that it would be more straightforward and there'd be a lot less material to remove. Another shot that I feel is pretty interesting to discuss is the computer dashboard unit piece near the head tube of the frame. This area we were keen to shoot because of the graphics that are by the head tube, and you can get a good feel of the forged carbon in the elements around the computer. And also the computer itself is important for people to see. For this shot, and in past shots that I've taken where there's a LED lit screen, I've personally found it best to set up the lighting to be how you want on the product and everything around it, and then turn the lights off or turn the transceiver off and change your settings in the camera so that you get just the screen lit how you want, and use post work to put the two together. So that's what I did here. You can see in the images here that the final product looked like this, and before that we had the screen on. It doesn't really show anything because the light to light the scene is overpowering it, and we have an ambient lighting situation to show the screen, and in Photoshop we put the two together. A little bit of a touch up to the temperature of the screen, and it's off and gone. One of my favorite shots from the shoot is of the seat tube. This was primarily to show the graphics on the back of the seat tube. However, the rear of the bike is quite interesting looking to my eye with the way the lines come in, and I wanted to get a dead perfect center behind it and show those lines. The way the light also wrapped around the tubes gives a really good idea of what the forged carbon looks like beneath the clear coat, and I think it looks amazing. The graphic shows up well, the silver of the rocker link, the upper link there looks great. And a shot that I didn't include in delivery, but I'll show here, was further back again with the whole frame visible. And I do really like this one too. I don't think that it was necessary. I already gave 2 images of the seat tube. But for my purposes, this is this is an interesting shot with all the different lines and the machinery. It looks like a high-end piece of machinery, but it's also ambiguous enough that if you weren't a cyclist or you didn't know this was a bike frame, you wouldn't know what you're looking at. And I just find that interesting. It really gets the mind spinning and trying to discern what's going on. Two images that were must-haves for the shoot were the Cascade links. Crestline bikes use Cascade links exclusively, I believe. I don't think they use anything else. And it was important to show that the links on the bike are Cascades, show the logo, show the machining details. There's a lot of really cool pieces to these links, and the way they show off on the bike with the black of the forged carbon is really sharp. I think that with that little bit of bronze kind of finish on the XT shock is a really sharp finish, and it's a good looking bike. Another shot that is partly with those Cascade links that we forgot to discuss in preparation for the shoot is the long travel and short travel adjustment on that lower rocker link. On that lower link. So I added that into the mix to make sure that Troyden had everything he needed. That shot actually had quite a bit of retouching needed as well. The swing arm coming up past that link, the way the light was hitting that showed quite a bit of dirt and grime. There's, at this point later in the day, there are some reflections, coloured reflections coming into the shot that I don't like. So I had to remove all that and equalize everything again. So that's a little walkthrough of a product shoot for Crestline bikes. Hopefully that gives a little bit of insight into what's happening behind the scenes. I'll keep trying to get more behind the scenes stuff with the actual shoots. Maybe I'll set up a GoPro or something. It's really hard as a one-man show once I get into it to change what I'm doing with the shoot, the focus, the images required for the client, and then start shooting video for behind the scenes information. I think that the little mounting situation is pretty interesting with this one, so hopefully that was helpful. And if you enjoyed it, give it a like. Let me know down below if there's anything you'd like to see in the next video, or any elements of this that you'd like to discuss or know more information about. I'm happy to share. Thanks a lot. Catch you later.